Hello everyone, welcome back to the 4th episode of React Developer Log. Before we proceed to Spring 3, let's talk about some bugs we fixed in Spring 2. In Spring 2, there's a joiners form. In the form, there's a field called Area of Interest, as you can see from the screenshot below. In this Area of Interest field, the default option in the drop-down list is social media. Despite there being a social media option in the drop-down list, the form validation could not pick up the social media option and will reflect required, which will appear if the form is empty, if the form value is empty, not filled up. This is because the initial value corresponding to the area of interest field is empty or null and not based on the option value. In other words, the UI does not match the field value. This field value will only be updated to that in the drop-down list only when the user select an option. In common use cases, user will click on the drop-down list to select other options. However, there are definitely users who are interested in social media as an area of interest, and seeing that it's in the drop-down list, they will skip past it to go to other fields only to encounter the required error message, which will leave them puzzling. So these bugs definitely have to be fixed. To fix the bug, we must match the empty initial value to the default option value. In other words, the default option must be changed to empty instead of social media. So as you can see from at the bottom right hand side of the screen, I've created another option value that is empty. This way, the user will be forced to click on the drop-down list because there's no option value in the area interest field, and they have to select a value from it. With the bugs fixed, let's move ahead with Spring 3. In Spring 3, we are doing the Contact Us page. So we'll start off with Backlog Refinement, then we'll go through how we do the pages. It's not plural, it's page. And last but not least, we will show a live demo. Without further ado, let's start with the Backlog Refinement sessions for Spring 3. This Backlog Refinement is also known as Backlog Grooming. However, the grooming word is considered dirty nowadays and is least preferred. That's why it's not commonly seen. The word more commonly used is Backlog Refinement, but actually they mean more or less the same thing. By convention, the aim of the Backlog Refinement is to finalize detail of the product backlog with all parties, such as the product owners and the developer team. You may be wondering, what detail is there to finalize in the product backlog? It could be the user stories, or in other words, the items in terms of system functionalities to be in the backlog for the current spring that they will be developing. Of course, the product backlog we are referring to is for the current spring. It's nothing wrong to also do some priority planning for shifting of the items to other spring. So in our instance, I've adapted the Backlog Refinement because, as I mentioned earlier, the Backlog Refinement is for all parties. And by all parties, it includes you, our stakeholder. Hence, I would like to take the opportunity to go through the deliverable with you. For this spring, we are building the Contact Us page. This page is made up of the 3 sections The top section is just a chunk of text description of the hawkers, so it's pretty standard, and we have already covered similar things in previous spring. Thus, we will not be covering it in this spring, but we will do it. The bottom section is made out of 3 cards that contain icons that on click will route the user to the social media page. Last but not least, the middle section is a map that zoom in on the area that the hawker is at. You can notice that there's even a marker for the hawker center. So let's start with the social media section, which is the bottom section. This bottom section is actually made out of 3 cards that contain the picture, description, and link to the social media site. So we will be doing the user interface, and for the user interface as per previous spring, we are still using Bootstrap and grid layout to space out the contents. So for grid layout, it involves having rows, and each row will contain 1 or more columns, and each column will contain the content. Note that this section is actually a row by itself, and it has 3 columns which has a equal width of 4. So this is reflected in the code. 1 row, and I've left out the other columns because it's just an abstract to show how I do up 1 column. And within each column there's the card, the image, the description, and the inline CSS style. So this card is actually a React Bootstrap card component. And do notice that this image is actually from the public folder under the photo, from the public folder, from photo folder which is located within the public photo. That explains, if you can see my mouse, under card image source.photos, this is the location. So this code below will render this section, and it will show the interface. Since we are done with the interface, we want to add the user interaction. We want to let user click on the card, and in turn reroute them to the hawker social media sites. For the entire card to be clickable, we need to insert an onClick method, and this onClick method will execute a function called onClickCard1. It can be any name, but I just name it onClickCard1. And this onClickCard1 will open up a new window tab containing the link to the social media site. How it does so is to use the window.open method. Now we are done with the social media section, and we'll move on to the last section, which is our location section. For this section, we have to embed an interactive map with a marker on the hawker center. By interactive, the user should be able to drag around the map to navigate and view other locations within the map. Do note that we will not be coding from scratch the interactive map. Rather, we will be using existing map application or library to say. And for the map, we are actually down to 2 choices. The first is Google Map, the second is OneMap. For Google Map, it is very mainstream and have libraries that support React. However, do note that it's not entirely free. fees do apply to certain features and level of usage. On the other hand, OneMap is an open source library created by the local authority, which is Singapore Land Authority, and is totally free for usage. However, it does not directly support React. It uses the leaflet for JavaScript, or in other words, JS leaflet library, and if we were to use it, we have to do further adaptation to fit it for usage in React. If I'm not wrong, what we have to do is to use the React leaflet library and adapt the JS leaflet library code to it. However, doing so will be very troublesome and costly in terms of man-hour. And as time is not on our side, we prefer to have libraries that have greater ease of implementation. Hence, we will be going with Google Map. However, life is not so simple. Though there's official library that use wrapper, it support TypeScript only, which we do not use. As you can see in the screenshot below, Google Map React wrapper, and there's a big TS word here, icon here in blue. That is actually TypeScript, and that is actually the official library for React in the official documentation itself. Hence, we have to turn to community library for easier implementation and also for fun too. For community, to be very frank, I'm pretty new to map libraries, so please pardon me if I'm wrong, because what I'm going to say next is that I feel that it's very puzzling for there to be so many community libraries out there for Google Map, and this existence of libraries is puzzling because there is already an official library for React there. It made me wonder, why do people still create more community library when there is an official library there? And in that sense, there has to be a reason for it, and it kind of vindicate my decision to use community library. So since I do feel compelling reason to use it, community library, to say, the question now is, which community library should I use? My answer is, I have no idea. It's because I'm pretty new to it. However, whenever we are lost, there's one reliable guide we can and always turn to, and that will be Google. So what we have to do is to Google search for top React Map library to get a good sensing of the most popular libraries out there, and through it we can have a good gauge of the pros and cons. As you can see from the screenshot below, these sites do give a good overview of the library, and some even come with review. So do feel free to look at a couple of sites to get a good sensing first, before proceeding to view the libraries in GitHub. So as you can see in the GitHub site, you can view details of the library, such as the weekly download, what version has it been at, to show how regularly it has been updated, and when it is last published. And there's also other info out there, including the issues. So when viewing this library, I will hope that you all could take note of the language that's being used. Is it using functional or class-based component, how many downloads there are in a week, and also do take a look at the issue, which actually serve as a form of customer review. From it, you can actually have a good gauge on what is the issue that is commonly faced, and with all that in consideration, I have shortlisted 3 libraries, namely the Google Map React, React Google Maps, and Google Maps React, which is similar in name to the first one but has a S. So for the first one, I realized that it has the most number of downloads, but it is class based, and for that reason I'm rejecting it. For the second one, I realized that it has the most number of stars, but the last commit was 4 years ago, so it is not very updated, and for that reason I have decided not to use it. And for the last one, Google Maps React, I feel that it's pretty decent in terms of popularity, and it has a class and functional based component. That's why I choose it. Sorry. Okay, so we know that the library allowed functional based component to be used through the use of wrapper. So what is a wrapper then? I chosen it. Yes, not sure why it's rotating it. Okay, so to sidetrack, before we proceed to further discussion on Spring 3 development, I would like to introduce a bit on wrapper. Back to the fundamentals, JavaScript is object oriented, and that means that almost everything is an object. So being an object, it will have its own properties and method. Note that I use the word almost. There are things that are not an object, such as primitive values. In JavaScript, there are 3 types of primitive values: string, number, and booleans. These primitive values are not object, and they are not object, so they do not have their own property and methods. Whoops. When I say that, I believe the above screenshot come to your mind, because for string, there is a .line method that will give you the length of the string, and there is also a famous index of method of strings that give you the position of the alphabet that is located in the string. So, is it really true that primitive values do not have their own methods? Hear me out first. This primitive value in exact term does not have its own method. So what JavaScript did was create a wrapper object around the primitive value so that you can access its property and method like regular object. However, do note that this wrapping is temporarily for that particular instance, and maybe I will have to cover a bit more in the future, not in the spring session, but in future video when I do touch on JavaScript fundamentals. So bear with me in the meantime. So primitive value is not an object, really, because it can't create its own methods and properties. As you can see from the example below, for this food primitive value that I have earlier, there is a string. I try to assign its own property, its own method called describe, and this describe method will actually do a console log to publish this particular statement called fragrant rice chicken, chewy chicken. And when I try to run it, I will have an error called uncaught type error that says that it's not a function. So this will prove that primitive value is not an object, because you can't create its own methods and properties. So now that we understand what a wrapper is, I want to introduce you to what a React wrapper component is. In terms of concept wise, it's similar to wrapper because it wraps codes. However, what it wraps is different, because in wrapper we wrap primitive value, but in the React wrapper component we are wrapping blocks of codes. This block of code will act as template to display child components. So in essence, we are actually using these React wrapper components to create our own customized component. This customized component is actually very useful for React repeating components such as your buttons, cards. And do note that we are no strangers to it, because we have been using it for, if you remember, in the homepage there's a horizontal scroll list. So in fact, each tiles in it is actually using a React wrapper component. And if you do recall, in our file directory, we actually have a component folder that's store the following button, card, footer components folders, and actually this component is referring to wrapper component. So at this moment, I give you some time to digest and to link back, to trace back the dots. Okay, so with that in mind, this Google Map API library are also using similar concept of customized components that let you incorporate these React components to your React app. So back to the main topic. The rules of thumb when using libraries is always refer to the official documentation. In this case, the official documentation is in the GitHub or npm page, and we have to refer to it. So if we want to install it, there are instructions on how to do so, and it's reflected in the screenshot below. You type npm install -- save Google Maps React in your console to install it first. Once done, let's study the official documentation in GitHub again. So if you look at the screenshot on the right, it states that there's a wrapper component called Google API Wrapper, which wrap the Google Map API code so that we can incorporate it as a customized React component to our React map. Also, do note that the documentation mentions that it's a higher order component, which means that it accepts another component containing the map parameters as props. In that case, it's the map container. So with that in mind, let's create the service folder, which is a file, and name it googlemap.js. Now, in the googlemap.js file, we import the Google API wrapper. There is a higher order component that accepts another functions as props. Next, we create the function that we have to put in the Google API wrapper, and we name it Google Map Functions. This function will actually contain the property of the map, such as the dimensions, where it's zoom at, etc. Lastly, as you can see here, we will pass it to the wrapper, and we are done with this googlemap.js file. So what we're going to do now is, in the contactus.js page, we will have to import the map component so that we can insert the map component to our contact us page. After importing, what we want to do is to create a new row and column. Then once done, we will have to insert it between the column tag. This will render the Google Map in our contact us page. However, we are still lacking the Google marker that's pointing to the hawker center. So you can see here, we have zoomed in to a particular portion of the map, and you can see the map will contain the ABC Brickwork hawker inside. So to add the marker, we need to add a marker tag element between the map tag element here. So this map tag element, we insert the marker tag element, and this marker tag element will contain the properties such as the name, title, and coordinates of the markers. So we are done, and once it rendered, it will display the marker on the map. So finally, we are here in this moment that we are all awaiting for, which is the live demo. So let's go to the official page, which is hosted on our localhost 3000 page here, contact us page. Okay, so here we are at the contact us page. I'll just zoom it out. Yeah, okay. So as you can see here, our location section has a map with a marker on it. So don't mind the map being shaded out now in gray, because we're still in development mode, so it's for development purpose. As you can, if I zoom in here, see even the wording here say that, so don't mind it first. So if you can remember, I mentioned that the map is interactive, means you could really drag around the map and you could see other location inside the map. You can even zoom in, zoom out. Okay, so this map is fully functional. So in a way, this is like a user acceptance test. It passed what the user will have to is acceptable to the user. So now in the social media section, which is the bottom section, we could see 3 cards. The first is a link to the Facebook. So if I click on it, it will open up a new tab, and it will bring us to the Facebook page. So go back. Likewise for the Instagram icon here, if I click on it, it will bring us to the Instagram page. And for the email, because the official email is not up yet, so this part will not remain functional for the time being. And that is all. We are done. Thank you for staying tuned to the end. I hope you all find it enjoyable and also learn something from it. Do help to like and subscribe my channel. Thank you and have a nice day.